Shalom. All praises, blessings, glories, and honors to Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha Kodash. Double honors to my elder apostles and bishop elders of Great Millstone who have taught me this truth, as well of men of like mind. Shalom wa chasad, which means peace and mercy to the elect of the nation of Israel, whom are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native American Indians, and Israelite foreigners of the seed line of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom is scattered here in America, which is Babylon the Great, and abroad. To you I say Shalom, and Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Ratazah. This lesson is edifying and informative. The Ostrich effect and the D.D.B syndromes. D.D.B as in deaf, dumb, and blind. Someone who is deaf is unable to hear. Someone who is dumb is unable to speak. And someone who is blind is unable to see. Such individuals suffer from what I like to call spiritual D.D.B syndromes. And they also suffer from what is known as the ostrich effect. Now, what is the ostrich effect? This is from the Wikipedia. The ostrich effect, also known as the ostrich problem, was originally coined by Galai and Sadeh, 2003. The name comes from the common but false legend that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to avoid danger. This effect is a cognitive bias where people tend to bury their head in the sand and avoid potentially negative but useful information, such as feedback on progress. And I will also add news concerning things domestically and globally to avoid psychological discomfort. And we've all, at some point or another, witnessed individuals exhibit this particular effect, whereby, for example, we might have had asked them, do you know what's going on in the news? Have you been reading the news lately? Have you heard the news? And they might respond and say, oh, I don't read the news, or I don't watch the news, or I don't listen to the news because it's always bad news. And I don't like hearing negativity in my life. This is nothing more than an example of the ostrich effect. And thus, individuals who display this particular effect are deaf, dumb, and blind. Because even if you were to try to tell them what's going on domestically and across the globe concerning news, they'll deafen their minds. And then when you ask them certain questions of things that happened in the past that contributed to the things that are ongoing in the present, they'll be dumb and blind. because they will not be able to showcase prudence, which prudence means to see afar off. And so they are deaf, dumb, and blind. They suffer from spiritual D.D.B syndromes. They're unable to hear, unable to speak, and unable to see. In Isaiah, the 30th chapter, from the 8th verse on down to the 12th verse, gives us an example of this particular effect being seen throughout Israel. Now, before we go further in depth with what is the ostrich effect, let's read Isaiah chapter 30, verse 8. It says, "Now go, write it before them in a table." Write what? Write the things that are written within the Holy Scriptures, that are written for our learning, so that he who hears and that reads it may run that readeth it. Write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, which is the Holy Scriptures, the Bible, that it may be for the time to come, the time that is of prophecies of the end, because the end is coming. As it is written, the end is come. The end is come. It watcheth for thee. Behold, it is come. Forever and ever. So the things that are written within the Holy Scriptures are written for our learning forever and ever. Referred to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 29, verse 29. Verse 9, that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, which say to the seers, and the seers are the prophets. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 9 tells us that the prophets were once called seers. So 2/3 of the nation of Israel, which are rebellious and lying children, say to the prophets, to the seers, see not. Because a prophet's job is to prophesy. The word prophesy means to say before. Pro means before. Emphasize means to say. And to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things. Speak unto us smooth things. Oh, don't tell us any bad news. Don't tell us what's going on across the globe that in their minds may be considered to be extremely negative. Hence the reason why they exhibit this particular effect known as the ostrich effect. They bury their heads in the sand to avoid potentially negative but useful information. And these words are not negative. They are for our well-being. And they're useful because they're written for our learning, such as feedback on progress, to avoid psychological discomfort. So these words are grievous unto 2/3 of the nation of Israel. In fact, these words are likened unto a sharp two-edged sword, which spiritually cuts their bones, their marrows, their spirit, which causes them spiritual and psychological discomfort. That's why they exhibit this particular effect when they hear the words of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, because they're grievous unto them, because they have no light in them. As it is written, they hate him that rebuketh in the gates. They despise these words because there is no light in them. So they exhibit that ostrich effect. And in so doing, they become deaf, dumb, and blind. But in all actuality, Yahweh, through his son Yahushua, had preordained them from the beginning, according to Isaiah the 6th chapter, to be deaf, dumb, and blind, so that they may not receive the love of the truth, according to the book of 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter, that they might be saved. Okay? Which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things. Don't tell us any bad news. Instead, tell us only good news. But a part of the good news is so-called bad news. As it is written, the prophets that had been before me and before thee of old prophesied against many great kingdoms of wars, okay, which are woes and mournings and lamentations. Get you out of the way. Turn aside out of the path of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, the path of righteousness. Cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. And this is what they say. And this is the sentiment they share among themselves, which is that ostrich effect and that spiritual D.D.B syndrome. Wherefore, which means for this reason, thus saith the Holy One of Israel, because ye despise this word, and trust in oppression and perverseness, and stay thereon. So they trust in oppression and perverseness, and they stay thereon. And because of this, therefore, this iniquity, which iniquity is sin upon sin. What is sin? 1 John chapter 3 verse 4 tells us that sin is transgression of the law of Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai, and the wages of sin is death. The payment of sin is death. Shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, because remember, they are staying upon oppression and perverseness, which they also trust in. Therefore, this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. So when they least expect it, Yahweh Bahashem Yahushua will execute judgment upon them as a breach that suddenly falls upon someone that is sitting in their home. Their ceiling is weak and they ignore it. Eventually, a day comes when it breaks in and falls right upon them, and they die, because the breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. And he shall break it as the breaking of the potter's vessel that is broken in pieces. So they will be broken as a potter's vessel that is broken in pieces, and not just big pieces, but into pieces beyond repair. Okay, rendering the vessel beyond repair. It says, he shall not spare, so that there shall not be found in the bursting of it. He's sure to take fire from the earth, or to take water withal out of the pit, which is just a metaphor for how the Lord is going to break 2/3 of the nation of Israel, which say that the evil shall not overtake nor prevent them. Beyond repair, as a potter's vessel that is broken in pieces beyond repair. So much so that you can't even pick up a piece of it to take fire from the earth, or to take water withal out of a pit. Why? Because the Lord has appointed them to a strong delusion, one that causes them to exhibit what is known as the ostrich effect. Okay, and this particular effect was brought to my attention as I was having a discussion with a guy in the gym this morning. And he mentioned to me the ostrich effect and the concept of D.D.B, deaf, dumb, and blind. So immediately the spirit of Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai inspired me to write down a title for a lesson, because it's all spiritual. And I've actually seen this. People will literally say, "Oh no, it's I don't like listening to bad news, man." Especially women. "Oh, I don't like reading the news, watching the news because it's bad news." Oh, okay. All right. So now let's go a little bit more in depth to what the ostrich effect is. Now, this is from thedecisionlab.com. It says the ostrich effect, also known as the ostrich problem, is a cognitive bias. Now, a cognitive bias is a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. Individuals create their own subjective reality from their perception of the input. An individual's construction of reality, not the objective input, may dictate their behavior in the world. So these people are living in their own delusions, in their own perversenesses. Thus, cognitive biases may sometimes lead to perceptual distortion, inaccurate judgment, illogical interpretation, and irrationality. While cognitive biases may initially appear to be negative, some are adaptive. So many suffer from the cognitive bias of the ostrich effect that describes how people often avoid negative information, including feedback that could help them monitor their goal progress. And that includes news. Instead of dealing with the situation, we bury our heads in the sand like ostriches. In fact, the Lord likened women unto ostriches. This avoidance can often make things worse, incurring costs that we might not have had to pay. See that? If we had faced things head on. Now, where did this bias occur? Or where does it occur? Let's say you've been eating out a lot recently, probably more than you should. You should probably check your bank account balance to see what the damage is, but every time you think about doing so, you start to feel anxious. You know the situation is bad, but you don't want to see how bad. In the end, you keep up your bad spending habits, but you almost never check to see how much money you're spending. And we've all been guilty of that at different points in life, but eventually, we grew discipline to be able to manage our budget. Though it's easier said than done. Nonetheless, I digress. The point is obvious. All right. It says individual effects. The ostrich effect was coined by behavioral economists to describe the behavior of investors, but it can crop up in pretty much any area of life, from personal finance to project management to health. Right, you know that you're suffering from certain deficiencies because you're not taking care of your health, and then you don't want to tackle it head on. You choose to ignore it because you don't want to hear the bad side of things, and it's more pervasive than many people may realize. According to one poll, almost half of U.S. adults don't know the annual interest rates on their credit cards, right, the APR. While another study found that 20% of people enrolled in a weight loss program had never weighed themselves before. And that's a good example of the ostrich effect. The ostrich effect can be a serious drawback to tackling societal problems, such as climate change, so-called, because it's so overwhelming to contemplate the severity and complexity of these issues. It's often easier for elected officials to just ignore them entirely, and to reject information that contradicts their official stances. Why it happens? The ostrich effect has a couple of different meanings, depending on the context. In finance, this bias was coined to describe a specific pattern of investor behavior. Some investors were apparently sometimes more willing to make investments if the level of risk associated with it was unreported compared to similar investments with established risk. In psychology, however, the ostrich effect usually refers specifically to people's reluctance to get feedback on their performance, even though that information could help them to monitor their progress and successfully work towards their goals. This can also include being told about the news or being asked whether or not one knows what's going on in the news. It might be tempting to write off the ostrich effect as simple laziness, but people often go out of their way to avoid getting this kind of information. See that? Willingly they do it, even when it's accessible and easy to use, like investors seeking out investments with an unreported risk. A more relatable example might be that of a college student who does not read a professor's feedback on their paper, even if they want to do better, in the course. In fact, generally speaking, people are motivated to assess how they are doing and to strive for self-improvement. In spite of our good intentions, there are a few other forces at work within our psyche that can contradict and overpower the desire to perform better. And I will conclude reading here, and I'll leave the link to this article in the description box of this lesson, Lord is willing. So now let's go to Isaiah, the 6th chapter, and then conclude the lesson. Because not only do they suffer the ostrich effect, but again, they also suffer from being deaf, dumb, and blind, which is a consequence of the ostrich effect. Okay, which I again like to call spiritual D.D.B syndromes. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 9. And he said, go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, right? But understand not. And see indeed, but perceive not. They're deaf. They're unable to hear. They're dumb. They're unable to speak. And they're blind. They're unable to see. Okay? Spiritually stupid. Make the heart of this people fat. Make their ears heavy and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and convert and be healed. Because the Lord does not want 2/3 of the nation of Israel to come to the knowledge of the truth, that they may be saved. And here's the proof. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10. And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Why? Because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai shall send them strong delusions. So these people suffer from very strong delusions. Okay? Which is the result of all the deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that will lead to them being destroyed. That they should believe a lie. They believe in illusions, like the American dream, for example. I don't want to hear that. That's bad news, man. That they all might be damned who believe not the truth. That pleasure in unrighteousness. So with that, I will conclude this lesson. Baratazah, it has been edifying to the elect. And this has been another lesson. Until the next, shalom to the elect.